Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name's Nick and this is Idaho Up, and today we're going to be moving on to step 2 of our club style build, which is slapping a pair of risers, a new set of handlebars, a new set of grips, and some other miscellaneous items on the Sideshow Bob here. If you're looking for a new set of risers and handlebars, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this video because these OG risers and these ODI handlebars have some really cool features that help you tuck your wires in really nice. It's a really clean look. But before we get into the install process, if you enjoy these detailed install videos and you find them helpful, please make sure you subscribe to the channel and like this video. I put a lot of thought and time into these install videos, and anybody that's doing install videos on YouTube can tell you that if they're detailed, they can be brutal from a video and editing standpoint. So if you want me to continue doing these detailed install videos on all the motor machines I come across, then I need to know. So please make sure you like and subscribe. Otherwise, I might take a left-hand turn and try something else that is just a little easier on my own personal time. With that said, this is a detailed video. It covers everything from installing your risers, handlebars, grips, electrical, bleeding brakes, etc. So what I've done is create YouTube chapters, so if you don't want to, you don't have to watch the video all the way through. Just click on the section that you're interested in the video status bar below. For example, if you have a question on electrical issues, just go to that chapter, click on it, and it should answer any questions you may have. So with all the pleasantries out the way, let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to do is remove this Harley Davidson quick release windshield, and as a side note, I plan on putting some really dark tint on half this windshield in the future as part of this build, so keep your eye out for that video. Next, I'm going to take the bolt out that mounts the gas tank to the motorcycle so that I can angle the gas tank up and more easily get to the electrical wires on the side of the bike that go to the handlebars. I'm using an old tape roll to prop up the tank because I know it won't scratch it, but you can use whatever's handy. As part of this process, we're going to have to take the brake fluid out of the front master cylinder on the handlebars, so it's a good idea to use a shop blanket to cover up the tank and any exposed paint. Also, you might possibly drop a tool or the handlebars while you're moving things around, and the blanket might save you from a dent or some scratches. Okay, now we're going to take the reservoir cover off so that we can empty the brake fluid. We're going to do this all by hand, so no special tools required. Once you've taken the reservoir cover off, you'll find a plastic gasket with a rubber seal on the bottom of it. You're just going to want to crack that up so you can let some air into the system, and then just put it right back down so that brake fluid isn't flying everywhere when you're bleeding the brakes. Now I know I said you're not going to need any special tools, but you are going to need a container to bleed the brake fluid into and a piece of tubing that you can find at any hardware store that will fit over the bleeder valve on the brake assembly. The easy way to do this is to put a wrench onto the bleeder valve prior to putting the tubing on it. That way it just stays put as you're pumping fluid out of the system. From here, you're just going to build up pressure in the system by squeezing the clutch lever several times, and then you're going to bottom it out while you open the bleeder valve with the wrench, and you'll see brake fluid starting to bleed from the system. Repeat this process several times until the brake reservoir and the line are empty. You'll notice that the clutch lever pull gets easier as you pump the fluid out of the system. Once the system's empty, you can use a paper towel to soak up the rest of the fluid in the reservoir. As a side note, don't worry about the throttle handguard missing. I took it off to look at something else that has nothing to do with this video. Yours would still be on. Now just make sure the bleeder valve is closed and disconnect your container. Now just recap the system so that no dirt and grime gets inside of it. Now we're going to take the brake cable line off, but I'm going to cover the fender real quick just in case I get a few drops of brake fluid out of the line. Now just crack the nut on the brake line loose, but do it carefully so you don't break anything, and then just unscrew the nut. From here, I'll just wrap this end of the brake line up in a sandwich bag with a rubber band so it's not leaking everywhere. You don't see me do that here, but you'll see me take it off when we reapply the brake line. More on that later. Now that we're done bleeding the front brake, we're going to move on and we're going to unplug all the cables that lead to the handlebars electrical system located in this rubber grommet. So in an effort to make this video as short as possible, you can see that I went ahead and unplugged all the connections now. But don't worry, we're going to cover all the connections when we put it back together later on in the electrical chapter of this video. Now I want to point something out. My electrical wires are already outside the bars. Yours will still be in the handlebars because that's how they were from the factory. I pulled them out because I was trying to diagnose an electrical issue that I was having that is unrelated to this video. As a side note, I did figure that out, but I didn't put them back in the bars because I knew I'd be doing this video and it would have been a waste of my time. The important thing to note is that you just need to make sure they're all unplugged from the motorcycle so that when you pull the bars off the bike, they don't get caught up on anything. Now I'm going to take the controls off of both sides of the bike. I'm going to let the clutch side hang, but I will take the brake side completely off. On each side of the bike there are 2 screws that hold on the electrical housing covers and then they'll come off, and 2 screws in the clamp that hold on the levers and then they'll come off. Again, I have to point out that my electrical lines aren't running through the handlebars like yours will be, but it doesn't change anything. You just take everything off like I'm showing you, and then you just slowly pull that electrical line through the handlebars as you take the switches off.
Just let a man breathe and just hush so my mind could just see, so my mind don't erupt. At times I feel I can't get enough, but I sip a double cup and I spend a couple bucks. Sending out some love to my blood, to my girl, to my buds, to the homie up.
Once you pull the switches off, you can take the instrument cluster off and then pull the handlebars off the bike. To take the instrument cluster off, you're just going to need an Allen key that fits the 4 bolts that hold it on.
So I spit into this truth when I pray for lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes.
Loved you till my tears went silent. If this is war, I don't think I can fight it. Had to let you go, let it flow, cry. Can't say we didn't try. I'm bones and flesh, but I don't break. Built walls up so high, can't escape. Wish I could say I was okay. What the fuck are you running?
So I spit into this truth when I pray for life.
Now we're just going to take the risers off using a wrench.
Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes. 6 million ways to die. So I spit into this truth when I pray for lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes. That's a rap, man. Enough of them facts, man. A slap to the face. Reality's bad, hand. I'm
Now there's 2 cup washers on each riser, so 4 total. And you're going to want to make sure that you just retain these 4 cup washers because we're going to reuse them when we put the new risers on. Now we're going to remove the 4 rubber bushings and the 2 metal spacers. We're going to be reusing the spacers, but I'm replacing the rubber bushings with some OG polyurethane bushings that are a little stronger, but you can reuse these if you want. And these are the spacers that we're going to be reusing with the new bushings, but again, you can use the stock bushings if you want to. Here's a strength comparison of the stock rubber bushings versus the ones I'm going to be replacing them with from OG Garage. Now we take the 2 stock spacers and put them into 2 of the aftermarket bushings so that we can put them back on the bike. Here you'll see that I already did the left riser for the sake of time, and now I'm pushing in the bushing and the spacer on the bottom end. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's kind of hard to get these in, but I have a trick using a C-clamp. You'll notice that I put a washer on the top end, and it's just so I don't scrape the paint on the bike with the C-clamp. And all you're going to do is put that C-clamp on and kind of tighten it slowly until that bushing sits flush. And you're going to want to make sure you go real slow on this because you don't want to crinkle up that bushing so that it's unusable. On the top, I'm just going to push the bushing in as far as I can with my hands, and then I'm going to put the cup spacer on, and then I'm actually going to use the bolt for the riser and the riser to slowly clamp it down as I tighten the riser on until that bushing is completely flat. Before you do that, you might want to consider just putting some Loctite on the bolt. Now make sure you're putting your risers on as straight as humanly possible, as if you were sitting on the bike with it standing up. Now we're going to prep the new handlebars for install, but before we do that, we need to get the internal throttle out of the stock bars. And all you need is a flathead screwdriver, and it'll pop out, and then you just carefully feed the line through the bars until they're out. From here, we're going to take the instrument cluster out of the stock clamp and put it into the aftermarket OG clamp. Now we're going to take the stock harness off because we're going to be replacing this with an OG extended harness. Now we have to unscrew 4 screws inside the stock clamp to get the instrument module out.
So my mind don't erupt. At times I feel I can't get enough, but I sip a double cup and I spin a couple bucks. Sending out some love to my blood, to my girl, to my buds, to the homie up above.
Now you just push the instrument module out of the stock clamp and put it into the OG aftermarket clamp.
So I spit into this truth when I break for lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes. 6 million million ways to die, so I spit into this truth when I break the lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies.
There is a rubber seal around the instrument module, and you're going to want to make sure that when you push it into the OG clamp that that seal is sitting correctly inside.
I'm bones and flesh, but I don't break. Built walls up so I can't escape. Wish I could say I was okay. What the fuck are you looking at?
6 million ways to die, so I spit into this truth when I break.
Now you're going to notice that there's no screw holes to put the stock screws back into the OG clamp, but don't worry about this. When you clamp it down onto the bars, it'll hold it just fine, but it is something you want to keep in mind if you ever take the clamp off so that you don't drop the instrument module. Now you just want to plug in the OG extended harness and the clamp's ready to be installed back onto the bike. I'm just checking the fitment here real quick, and then we'll move on to the handlebars.
That's a rap, man. Enough of them facts, man. A slap to the face. Reality's back, hand. I'm trying to keep it real and keep my stacks, fam. But empty's killing for a rack, rapping in a trash can. Like what you saying, dog, you need to backtrack. It's how you claim to be a rapper if you can't rap, fam. No, for real. How the fuck you claim to...
Okay, now we're going to move on to handlebars and internal wiring. And this is where you're going to have to make a choice, because if you put on risers like I did, and the height of those risers plus the new handlebar height is taller than the stock handlebars, then you're most likely going to have to extend the length of the wiring inside the bars. And this is the choice you have to make. Do you want to purchase a plug and play option, or do you want to go ahead and cut the wires and solder in extensions? I originally purchased a plug and play option, and honestly, I wish I would have saved my money, because ultimately I ended up cutting the wires anyway, and I'm going to tell you why. One of the reasons I don't like the plug and play option is that all these plugs seem to congregate in the same location at the end when you're trying to tuck the wires away, and it's just not a very clean look, and it's kind of hard to tuck them all out of sight. The other reason I don't like the plug and play option is that it's a lot easier to fish the wires through the internals of the bar when you just cut them. If you choose the plug and play option, you're still most likely going to have to depin all of your wires in order to fish them through the handlebars. I'm not going to get into that process now, but I will put a link to another YouTuber's video that you can go check out right here that I think does a pretty good job of explaining the depinning process. With all that said, we're going to go ahead and start by slipping in the internal throttle. I do want to point out that I did depin this because, like I said, I originally was going to do the plug and play option, even though I later decided to cut the wires for a cleaner end look. After depinning all the wires, I did go ahead and wrap some electrical tape around the pins just so they'd be closer together and it'd be a little easier to slip them through the handlebars. I then put some fishing wire through the handlebars and attach the other end to the taped end of the internal throttle just to make it a little easier to pull them through the handlebars.
Just let a man breathe and just hush so my mind could just see, so my mind don't erupt. At times I feel I can't get enough, but I sip a double cup and I spin a couple ducks. Sending out some love to my blood, to my girl, to my buds, to the homie up above. And no more time for picking up to these fakes who ain't around when the time's getting rough. 6 million ways to die, so I spit into this truth when I break the lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes. 6 million ways to die, so I spit into this truth when I break the lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes.
Loved you till my tears went silent. If this is war, I don't think I can fight it. Had to let you go, let it flow, cry. Can't say we didn't try. I'm bones and flesh, but I don't break. Built walls up so I can't escape. Wish I could say I was okay.
When you're done pulling the wire almost all the way through, make sure you line up the notches on the internal throttle and just push it into place.
When I break the lies, everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes. 6 million ways to die, so I spit into this.
Okay, now just do the same thing with the housing switch wires and the signal indicator wires on the throttle side of the bike. And I'm not gonna lie to you, this can be kind of tedious, but practice some patience and you should be able to get through it. The good news is that when you get to the brake side of the bike, it should be easier because there's not as many wires running through the bar because there won't be a throttle cable wire.
That's a rap, man. Enough of them facts, man. A slap to the face. Reality's back, hand. I'm trying to keep it real and keep my stacks, fam. But empty's killing for a rack, rapping in a trash can. Like what you saying, dog, you need to backtrack. It's how you claim to be a rapper if you can't rap, fam. No, for real. How the fuck you claim to be a rapper? 6 million ways to die, so I spit into this truth when I pray for lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes. 6 million ways to die, so I spit into this truth when I pray for lies. Everybody wanna talk, but all I hear is lies. Everybody been fake, all I see in their eyes.
I'm so far away from home, in this desert of regrets. Never thought that I would have to let you go. Tell me, how can I forget? If I could travel back in time, I'd lay a blanket full of stars.
Now just rinse and repeat on the other side, and like I said, it should be easier because there's less wires running internally through the bars. Okay, now we're going to attach the handlebars to the risers, and this is where you're really going to fall in love with these OG risers because you just slip the wires through the holes in the top and you have good access to them from the side to pull them all the way through. And then later on we'll use 2 small carbon fiber pieces to cover up the wires on the risers and give it a cleaner look.
Words like water in my hands. I guess there's nothing left to say. Never thought that I would have to.
Okay, now we'll reinstall the clamp and the extended OG wire that comes off the clamp. Later on we'll be able to tuck that into the side of one of the risers and it'll clean that look up as well.
Even if you don't love me, I will break your fall. Even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me.
So as we discussed earlier in the video, this was the moment that I decided to abandon the plug and play option that I originally thought I was going to use and simply cut the wires. However, I will say it was nice having the plug and play wires because I used them to extend the stock wires by simply cutting off the appropriate plug and play end and using the rest of it as the extension. Another reason this was nice is because all the plug and play wires were the same color as the stock wires, so when I was soldering them back together I could just match the colors right up. But it's not necessary, you could just simply buy a reel of the same gauged wire and it would work just fine. You just have to pay closer attention when you were soldering them together. Now if you don't go with the plug and play option and you choose not to buy the plug and play wires, I do want to warn you about one thing, and that is before you cut the plugs off the stock wires, ensure that you're leaving enough wire behind that plug so that you can solder it back in after you add your extensions. Now if you've never soldered before, I'm not going to get into it in this video, but I am going to add a link to a past video I did that shows you how to solder, and I'll put that right here. Just make sure you jump to the 5-minute mark to save yourself some time and then watch it for about 2.5 minutes and you'll get the gist of soldering. It's really not that hard. I will recommend that you get comfortable while you're soldering and that after you solder 2 wires together, let them cool down a little bit before you slide the shrink wrap over the exposed wire and hit it with a heat gun. I say let it cool down a little bit because if you pull the shrink wrap over the wire before it's cooled down, it'll have a tendency to shrink down on you, and usually it's in the wrong place, and then you have to cut the wire and resolder it. But it's okay, after a few go-arounds you'll get the hang of it. It's really just a repetitive process that you do over and over again, and you get better at it each time. Full disclosure, throughout this video you're still going to see some of those quick disconnects connected, but I assure you by the end of the video I cut them all and I solder every one of the wires.
To brighten up the darkness of our sleepless nights, I'd find a way to make you smile. But I will break.
Okay, now that we've covered soldering the wires, I'm going to go ahead and start putting my handlebars back together prior to plugging them in. I'm also going to go ahead and install a set of aftermarket hand grips from ODI, and I can tell you I've been riding around quite a bit with these hand grips prior to releasing this video, and I'm a really big fan of them. They're super comfortable and they're easy to grip. Now, as far as putting the handlebars back together, it seems like a simple task where you would just reverse everything you did to take it apart, and essentially this is true. But again, this is a place I want to warn you to practice some patience because there's actually a lot going on. For example, you want to make sure your throttle is moving freely and nothing is impeding its movement. You also want to decide how long you want your signal indicator wire to be out. You also want to decide how and where you want your handlebars to be mounted, either leaning back or pushed forward or somewhere in the middle. And when you're installing the brake lever, you want to make sure it is seated properly against the electrical housing. So there's a lot going on. My advice is just simply put it on loose at first, kind of determine where you want everything, and then tighten it down.
I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. Intuition, call it what you want, but I got a feeling. I've been pacing, trying.
Now on the opposite side of the handlebars, there's another feature about these ODI grips that I want to point out. And that's the fact that in order to cinch them down on the bars, there's 2 screws on the grips. And after you find the positioning you like, you simply tighten those screws and it holds them in place.
Nothing to lose if you believe. Come with me. Are you ready? Hop aboard my rocket ship. Let's head for the eclipse. Ain't no ceiling to hold us down. We can turn it on around. Are you ready?
So when you finally think you're ready to tighten everything down for good, I recommend you sit on top of the bike and put the handlebars exactly where you want them and tighten them first before you tighten everything else, because after you do this, you're going to have to adjust everything else to match your riding position.
Well, life has nearly killed me, and my mind has put me on the edge. Life has nearly killed me, and my mind has put me on the edge. Though I can barely crawl, I've got to walk where these angels' feet are tread. Darkness nearly drowned me. Sunlight alone, don't it burn my eyes? Darkness nearly drowned me, and the sunlight alone, don't it burn my eyes?
Once you have your handlebars positioned where you want and tightened into place, then go ahead and start adjusting everything else and tighten it down one by one. Some things to remember: make sure you adjust your signal indicators where you want them to be pointed, adjust your mirrors where you want them to be pointed, try to have your master cylinder where your brake fluid goes in a level position, and make sure there's free play in your throttle and that you tighten down the other hand grip.
I got to lay down here and rest before I can take another step down that lonesome road. Where the darkness nearly drowned me, the sunlight burned my eyes. This valley is much too deep, and this mountain so very high. I gotta lay down here and rest where I can take another step down this lonesome road.
Now, before plugging everything in, we still need to clean up the wires that are going to be running through the risers. And we're going to do that by separating the wires on the left side of the bike from the right side of the bike and running them through their respective riser. We'll then put them through the hole on the triple tree, and we'll install the carbon fiber pieces I mentioned earlier to give it a really clean look. Here's a look at the carbon fiber pieces that I purchased from Original Garage. Now keep in mind the risers do come with a pair of chrome ones, but I chose to purchase these carbon fiber ones just to give it a little more character. Now the screws that hold on the carbon fiber pieces are super small, so I recommend you put a little Loctite on them before cinching them down.
Where the darkness nearly drowned me, the sunlight burned my eyes. This valley is much too deep, and this mountain so very high. I gotta lay down here and rest where I can take another step down this lonesome road. Well, my cup is nearly empty. I got such a long way to go.
Now there's one more thing we have to do before we can plug these all into the motorcycle, and that's clean it up from the triple tree hole down to where we stick all these wires into the rubber grommet. I recommend that you take all these wires and you just put them in one large heat shrink tubing like this one I picked up from Harbor Freight. You can get heat shrink tubing at Harbor Freight of all different sizes for relatively cheap, so I recommend you pick this stuff up there. Right here you can see that the tubing was longer than I needed it, so I simply shortened it prior to hitting it with the heat gun. Just be mindful not to cut any wires if you have to do this. From here, just come in with the heat gun and shrink down the tubing. Now I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on where to reconnect all your wires. And the first one we're going to talk about is the headlight if you disconnected it. It's going to be the big plug that's off by itself, and you can just shove it back into the frame of the motorcycle after you plug it in. Now I'm going to pause this section of the video because this is where you make all your other plug connections, and I'm just going to point out what each individual connection is. First off, you need to remember that all the plugs are color coordinated. For example, if it's a gray male plug, it's going to plug into a gray female plug. Same with the black plugs and the white plug. Let's start with your signal lights. This gray plug right here is your left signal light, and this gray plug right here is your right signal light, as if you were sitting on the bike. But this isn't a big deal. If you get them mixed up, this is a simple swap right here to switch them from left to right. Now this black plug right here is for the rest of the switches on the left side of the bike, and these two black plugs right here are for the rest of the switches on the right side of the bike. Again, this is as if you were sitting on the bike. Now this final gray plug right here is for your front wheel sensor that goes to your ABS system. Now moving on to the white plug right here, this is for your instrument cluster, aka your speedometer. And your last black plug right here with the orange center is for your throttle-by-wire. Now there is one more wire I wanted to talk about, and that's this wire right here. On my motorcycle, this wire wasn't connected to anything, but it's coming off with a throttle wire, so initially I thought it was for the cruise control option that Harley Davidson offers for the Street Bob. However, when I looked at their website, I found their cruise control, and it doesn't look like the plug would match up to this. So I honestly don't know what it's for, but you don't need to worry about it, just leave it blank. I will say that if you do know what this wire is for, please drop a comment. I'm kind of curious, and you might also help someone else out. Okay, now I'm just going to take all the plugs we just talked about and plug them into the correct location before we close up the neck of the motorcycle.
I'm so far away from home, in this desert of regrets. Never thought that I would have to let you go. Tell me, how can I forget? If I could travel back in time, I'd lay a blanket full of stars to brighten up the darkness of our sleepless nights. I'd find a way to make you smile, but I will break your fall.
Now I just recommend you do a function check on everything, your headlight and your signal lights and the instrument cluster, before you close it all up.
Break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. Words like water in my hands, I guess there's nothing left to say. Never thought that I would have to let you go. I wish that I could make you stay, but I will break your fall, even if you don't love me.
Now that it's all closed up, we're just going to drop the tank and resecure it.
I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even if you don't love me. I will break your fall, even if you don't love me, even
Just like the wires, we're now going to have to extend the clutch cable. But this is where the 2018 and up Harley Davidson Softail models are really nice, because you no longer have to replace the entire clutch cable, you can just replace the upper half. What this means to you is that you no longer have to do a primary oil change just so you can put taller bars on your bike. This is a really nice feature, and I'm glad to see that Harley Davidson made this change. I chose to switch out my clutch cable with this LA Choppers cable. They have different lengths depending on how high you want your bars, but I got the 12 to 14 inch length even though my bars were sitting at about 15.2. I did this from past experience and the bars ended up working out perfectly, so I recommend the 12 to 14 if you're right around that 15 inch mark. The first thing you're going to need to do is take off the clutch cable clip and then push up the protective cover, exposing where the upper and lower half of the cable connect. On the yellow piece, you're going to see two little red clips. You're going to push those both towards the center, and then you're going to push forward until the red button pushes out on the other side.
At times I feel I can't get enough, but I sip a double cup and I spend a couple bucks.
Once you get the button pushed out, you're going to compress the spring and push the button back in. This will hold the spring in a compressed position. What this does is relieves tension at the upper portion of the bike near the clutch lever so that you can remove the clutch cable. From here, you're going to remove the retaining ring from the pivot pin. Then you're going to pull out the pivot pin, and this will release the clutch lever from the motorcycle.
Loved you till my tears went silent. If this is war, I don't think I can fight.
Now you just pull out the plastic pin and the lever is released from the clutch cable. From here, go back to the lower end of the cable, and on the yellow piece, you're going to see a small window, and inside that window, you're going to see a little metal tab sitting on top of a metal ball that is connected to the lower clutch cable. Using a small flathead screwdriver, just bend that tab upwards and away from that metal ball. From here, you're going to push the red button out again. You'll notice that the little metal ball is sitting in a set of claws. By pushing this button out, you release the tension on those claws. Now you can use a flathead screwdriver to push the little metal ball forward, free of the metal claws. Once you push the ball forward, you'll notice that the metal claws move up and past the back side of the ball. On the lower portion of the yellow piece, you'll notice two small retaining clips on the front and back side. Just release the pressure of those clips using your small flathead screwdriver, and then you can disconnect the lower portion of the clutch cable from the upper portion. Now you can just put that clutch cable to the side and replace it with your new extended clutch cable in the exact reverse order. Okay, we're now on the home stretch of this install on these handlebars, and the last thing we need to do is reinstall a brake cable and then fill the front brake system back up with brake fluid. Now, when I was first planning to install this new handlebar and riser setup, I originally purchased a longer brake line, but I found that when I went to install it, it was a little too long for my liking, and ultimately the stock cable still worked for this length, so I just went ahead and reused it. I think this is important to point out to you because my handlebars are about 15.2 inches high as they sit now with the risers and the new bars, and if they were any longer than that, I would have had to use the aftermarket brake line. But if your bars are under that, go ahead and feel free to use the stock line and save yourself some money, and potentially you won't even have to bleed your brakes like I did. Now, if you determine that you do need an extended brake line, I will tell you that the one I purchased for this setup and was originally planning on using was 33/4 inches long. With that said, let's get this line reattached and bleed the brakes. First, I'm going to take off the sandwich bag that I mentioned previously that I put on so that brake fluid wouldn't be leaking out of this upper line, and then we'll reattach it to the box that connects to the lower line. I do want to point out that my motorcycle has ABS. If your Street Bob doesn't have ABS, this is going to be one continual line all the way down to the caliper. You're not going to have a line separated by this middle box, and that's a different animal, so you're going to have to look at different brake lines when you're planning out your install. From here, you're just going to thread the upper line into the box that connects to the lower line, and you just want to be wary not to cross thread anything Other than that, it's designed to hold the brake fluid, so there's no need to put Teflon tape on it or anything. You're just going to want to keep a close eye on it for a while after the install. Make sure it's not leaking and it doesn't need to be tightened up a little. Now we're just going to set up the same contraption we used earlier to bleed the brake line dry, except this time we're going to be filling it up and getting rid of any air bubbles in the line. We'll start out by adding some .4 brake fluid into the master cylinder. Make sure this is coming from a sealed container that hasn't been sitting around your garage for a while open, because brake fluid has a tendency to go bad quickly because of moisture reasons. Now during this entire process, make sure you keep some brake fluid in the master cylinder so that you're not introducing more air into the line, because if you do that, it's just going to take longer. You essentially just want to always ensure that these two little holes in the bottom of the master cylinder are always covered with brake fluid. So in this case, you would definitely need more brake fluid to cover those holes up and not introduce air into the line. I recommend you just cover the sight glass on the side, and when it drops about halfway to that sight glass, just make sure you fill it back up. Just like when we bled the system dry, from here you're just going to squeeze the clutch lever several times and then bottom it out while you open the bleeder valve until you see brake fluid going through the system. You're going to continue to do this until the brake system is full, so at least above the halfway mark on the sight glass indicator. I prefer to have mine at about 3/4 full, but still visible in the sight glass, and until there are no more bubbles in the brake line at the lower end. As you go through the process, you'll notice that the clutch lever starts to get stiffer and stiffer as all those air bubbles work out of the system. I can also tell you that you can do this by yourself, but it's a lot easier to have a helper. And if you get bored of doing one job versus the other, you can just switch. Also, this is sped up for time's sake, but this process can take a while, so just practice some patience. So once all the air is out of the system, you're going to go ahead and make sure that bleeder valve is closed, and then you're going to remove your contraption that holds your brake fluid. And you'll notice that there's quite a bit of brake fluid in the jar, and that's because I put a lot of fluid through the system because I wanted to ensure that there were absolutely no bubbles in it. And clean up the brake caliper and the line, and make sure you put the rubber grommet back on the bleeder valve. Now just top off the brake fluid at the top end, and then you can go ahead and seal the master cylinder. And the last tip I'll give you is that when you're all done, your cleanup's finished, and you park your Harley, go ahead and find a sock or something and tie down your clutch lever. This will let any other air bubbles that may potentially be in the system work their way to the top of the master cylinder. I can promise you, if you do this, that when you come out the next morning, that clutch lever will be extremely more firm. And that's a wrap, guys. I'm done with this one, so I hope it was helpful. This is Nick with Idle Up, and I'll see you on the next one.